Hello and welcome to DSR's Need to Know. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, and this week, as every week, we're going to sit down and talk to a newsmaker who we think has a perspective you need to hear from. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator is the junior senator from Oregon and has been a leader on a wide variety of issues. One we'd like to look at in particular because he has been particularly outspoken about the onset of authoritarianism here in the United States. But before we get to that, we'll get to a little bit of the news. Welcome, Senator. How are you today?
David, it's great to be with you. Very well, thank you.
Great. Again, as I said, I'd just like to touch on a couple of the stories that are in the news today. The first one making big news today and yesterday has to do with the apparent order by someone up the chain of command in the United States to launch not just one but two attacks on a vessel, with the purpose of the second attack apparently being to snuff out the lives of a couple of survivors of the first attack, something that would constitute a war crime under the provisions of giving no quarter on a battlefield. Quite apart from the questions of whether the attack in the first place was a crime. And I was just wondering what you think of that, what you think of the tug of war between the White House and Secretary Hegseth and members of the military as to who's really responsible.
Well, it's horrific. First of all, let's just start with, before we even get there, that the trade that's coming out of Venezuela primarily is drug trade to Europe. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned about it, but it's not the primary source to the United States. And second of all, that there is not a clear foundation for international law for what's happening. The administration has provided very sketchy arguments in support of why what they're doing is a legal military encounter, in which case it would be a war crime to, as you put it, snuff out survivors. And if it's not a legitimate military encounter, then it's straight out, it's murder. So no matter where that falls in that debate over international law. Meanwhile, if the goal is to reduce the supply of drugs to the United States, we should be a lot more focused on Colombia and Honduras. And speaking of Honduras, the president is pardoning the former president of Honduras, who was convicted of building a cocaine superhighway to the United States. So this is profoundly troubling on both ends. Not a well-planned strategy for decreasing drugs flowing to the US, and a strategy that violates international law and falls either into the murder or the war crime department. And certainly the fundamental reasoning behind a lot of the conventions for conflicts is, how do we want our folks to be treated in a conflict? And by having a foundation that we honor, there's a higher chance that that will be honored when our military men and women are in a situation of essentially being disabled in combat, no longer a threat, and would not be killed, summarily executed by another force. So this, yeah, all of it falls into really terrible policy, terrible principles, and sets a terrible precedent for the future.
Yeah, and of course, related to all of this is the fact that there is a carrier battle group in the Caribbean. Uh, uh, Supplies are being shifted to Caribbean islands. It looks like the administration is going to make this a focus of the future, and in particular, it looks like we're kind of itching for a fight with Venezuela. And that, of course, I used to be the editor of Foreign Policy magazine. I think I know something about foreign policy, but I can't see a rationale for going to war with Venezuela. And I was wondering if you had an insight that I've missed as to why we might be doing that.
This reminds me a little bit of how George W. Bush really wanted to take out Saddam Hussein, and Trump really wants to flex his power and take out Maduro, who he doesn't like at all, and is certainly an authoritarian figure that we don't have any great love for, but still This is not a America First strategy, if you will. Putting our resources into this, and at this point puts us in a situation a little bit like the Russian tanks on the border with Ukraine. As they were building that up, we were saying it's inevitable they're going to cross and attack Ukraine. Russia said, no, no, we're not planning that at all. And meanwhile, here we are. Once you do this buildup, it creates a momentum of its own, in which if you then disperse those forces, it looks like you back down from something you spent a lot of money planning, a lot of effort to plan. And if so, the momentum becomes to proceed, which means you start striking targets inside Venezuela. And so my crystal ball, as cloudy as all crystal balls are, says the administration will progress to striking targets with the goal of removing Maduro from power, and that this is kind of a 1950s strategy that doesn't support America as a beacon of democracy or serve our interests in wise stewardship of our American resources. And by the way, it drives a real wedge into cracks in the Trump base, because Trump argued against doing these type of adventures around the world. So I do hope there's reconsideration and it does not proceed, but my bet is that it will.
Yeah, they do seem to be taking pages out of the worst chapters in U.S. international relations history. You know, tariffs didn't work and were a disaster, so they're doing that. And, you know, a lot of our, interventions in Central and South America turned out badly, and they seem to be doing that. One last question on this before we move on, and that is, the Secretary Hegseth was bragging at one point that he was deeply engaged in these original attacks, and in fact, said he was watching it live on Fox, and I mean, on Fox he noted that he was watching it live as it was happening, and now he's sort of trying to distance himself and say, well. The commanding admiral of Special Operations Command was really the guy who gave the order, and avoiding responsibility. Now, it did look over the past few days like there was actually some kind of bipartisan concern that this was a problem, including conservative voices like Senator Wicker saying we've got to look into this. Is it possible that the body of which you are part will actually investigate what's going on and hold people like Hegseth to account if giving illegal orders turns out to have been what happened?
Wouldn't it be wonderful if Republican leadership in the House and Senate, or at least the Armed Forces leadership committees, was to pursue a real investigation? I'm not holding my breath, but there's a possibility because many of my Republican colleagues are very concerned, including Roger Wicker. It says something that they have not released the full videotapes that we have for these various strikes. And so releasing those would be a chance for people to see what the U.S. was really up to, as opposed to just clips that the administration wanted to share. Second, there were some follow-on strikes. There were survivors, and those survivors were plucked and returned to their host countries. And I'm wondering if it was well pointed out that what happened on that first strike constituted either murder or war crime and changed the policy for some of the subsequent strikes. So there's a lot to be learned there, but it does appear that Hegseth, now recognizing that his bragging about this and the commentary about his ordering a strategy of no survivors, recognizing that it clearly falls into a category of war crimes or murder, is thinking, time to distance myself and blame somebody else, which is not a sign of leadership either.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that strikes me is that a number of your colleagues who had national security backgrounds a few days ago issued a video saying, don't follow illegal orders, which is the law. And this triggered the administration. All of this happened after these attacks. I'm just wondering to what extent that particular flare up And of course we all recall that the president said, the people like that are traitors and at prior time would be put to death. I'm wondering how all, does the shin bone connect to the knee bone here?
Well, I haven't heard directly from Senator Swatkin or from Senator Kelly, who are the two senators who were in that group, as to whether the early reports about the strikes helped motivate their comments. I would think that's very likely that it did contribute to it, because there were a lot of discussions here among my colleagues when those strikes were first announced, that there was not a valid foundation in international law for this conduct. I mean, we're basically taking boats that we, instead of intercepting them at sea to find out what they're going on, and if you will, detaining folks involved in drug trade. We have strategies that we're just saying, well, we'll leap to the conclusion they're involved in drug trade. The administration keeps saying, well, it has evidence, but it hasn't shared that evidence, which makes us very skeptical that they actually develop extensive evidence, since they're not willing to share it. So there was a lot of discussion here that this idea of just, hey, we want to show force, and so we're going to start blowing up boats that might be transporting people, maybe other legal activities. Maybe they're running money from one country to another. Well, who knows what they're up to? Maybe they are actually, some of them don't fit the profile of drugs. For example, one boat had enough people in it that you would not normally have that many people in a boat that was transporting drugs, because it's more weight of the people, less room for the product, and so forth. So much to be learned from an investigation. I hope there is one. And the administration's response to simply quoting the principle that the military is trained, that they are to resist and not obey illegal orders, simply educating people about that became a source for the administration to launch investigations and pressure, and even call for folks to be killed who express such views. I mean, this is outrageous stuff, way over the top. Maybe a good point related to our discussion about an authoritarian president.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to go from here, because I think, the average listener says, well, Venezuela is a long way away, or the Caribbean's a long way away, or Honduras is a long way away, and what does that have to do with it? But the actions by the administration to not consult with the Congress, to ignore standing law, to suggest that the word of the president was the last word, to pick one narco kingpin who the president apparently likes, flattered the president, set them free, and to brand, pick another one who the president doesn't like and make this all about the relationship with one man, are elements of an authoritarian drift in this country, which has manifested itself, of course, in other related drifts. We're not just sending troops to the Caribbean, we're sending them to your home state of Oregon. We're not just ignoring the rule of law as it pertains to the military. We're ignoring it as it pertains to federal prosecutors, as it pertains to whether or not to prosecute political opponents, and so forth. And so, this is like a disease which infects all the organs of the body. And that infection seems quite advanced to me. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk was you have been a real leader on trying to put this critical point squarely front and center in the attention, not just of your constituents, but of all Americans. And I just thought, what is it that has brought you to that point? What are the alarm bells going off for you?
Yeah, David, you're absolutely right. I've been ringing the alarm bells as loudly as I can. And the beginning of this is that I start each year by doing a lot of town halls, one in each county in Oregon, 36 town halls. And most of my counties are very red counties, so the majority. And so I get a lot of dialogue with folks coming throughout the kind of political spectrum. And folks were coming to my town halls very, very concerned about the authoritarian drift of the nation. And they were saying, what can we do? And I would say, well, first, get off the couch. You can't save our republic with a pillow over your head. And Second of all, fiercely advocate with your letters, with your phone calls, with your demonstrations, demonstrate outside the offices of your electeds that you don't like what's going on and you want them to do more. And third, join an affinity group, because to be angry and frustrated and alone is to be depressed, but to be angry and organized is to be energized and effective. But my constituents would push back and say, but Senator, you say we should hold our electeds accountable. We don't think you're doing enough. What else can you do to raise this? What other tools do you have in the Senate? And of course, it's a frustrating discussion because the Constitution is set up with a couple main protections against an authoritarian president. One is the courts rejecting the legality of actions the president takes. And the second is impeachment in the House and a trial in the Senate. Well, there's no way there's going to be an impeachment in the House of Representatives when it's under Republican control. And if there was, there wouldn't be the votes for conviction in the Senate based on what we saw with Trump's first two impeachments. And so it's other tactics in the Senate of trying to ask unanimous consent on issues, to highlight policies, trying to drive votes on amendments in order to illuminate policies, using the maximum time to debate the confirmation of certain key people. Like I insisted that we go 30 hours of debate through the night on Russell Vogt. And people are like, who the hell was Russell Vogt? Well, he happens to be kind of the puppet master of the architect, if you will, of this authoritarian takeover. None of those things resonate for the citizens. So it just made me think a lot about how we have a general situation where Americans assume that you lose your republic when men with guns storm a Capitol. But the fact is, over the last few decades, most republics that have died from an attack from within by an authoritarian personality as president who proceeds to undermine the checks and balances of the Constitution. And out of those various events around the world has become an authoritarian playbook. And Mr. Vogt understood this playbook. And it works in summary a little bit like this. The first thing you do is you fire the referees. So we saw Trump come in and he immediately got rid of the inspector generals and started to pressure the JAG and so forth. The second thing is you want loyalists controlling everything so people don't push back against your efforts. We saw that through the people who were nominated, people like Secretary Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, who were vastly unqualified and yet were pushed forward for the president because they are loyalists. And then you proceed to, well, you take on dynamics of power within your country. So, well, you can use security clearances to bully law firms. You can use research grants to bully universities. You can use the mergers and broadcast licenses to bully networks and even try to tell them who they can have on late night television. So we saw that piece unfold. You start ignoring due process. Well, I'm about halfway through kind of the 10 key steps of how you exercise authoritarian control, but it's a little bit of a long list, and so I'm going to pause here instead of just giving you all 10 at once.
Well, frankly, I want to hear, all 10 at once. This issue is so important, and I think one of the things that your various interventions on, to bring this out has underscored is this didn't happen in 2024 or 2025. It didn't happen with Russell Vogt going to be OMB. It didn't happen with just one thing. It's been a long time coming. I mean, and perhaps this ties into other points that you were going to make. But, for example, decades ago, people on the right said we need to claim legislatures, we need to claim the court, we need to change the rules. They started playing by different rules with how people got on their list got put on the Supreme Court, and of course, in 2024, the Supreme Court makes a decision on the Trump case, which had sent a message to Donald Trump, which is, you're above the law. you have impunity. You can do anything you want. And he also believes that because of his pardon power, that he can tell the people around him to break the law and it'll be okay because he'll let them off the hook. And it seems to me that, the old story about, I guess it's a Hemingway quote about how bankruptcy, it happens gradually and then all at once. In some ways, that seems to be what has happened with authoritarianism.
Point taken. And if we turn the clock back about 30 years ago, a group of very wealthy people got together, created what was called the Federalist Society. I'm generalize here, but they wanted to see courts that would make rulings for corporations that were very positive as opposed to the environment or consumers or free speech or anything else. But they needed a base in order to make that happen. And they found the base by looking to Jesse Helms, who had created the first really effective small dollar operation through letters. And what did Jesse Helms put his emphasis on? It was on cultural issues, specifically on abortion. This is the time when the Republican Party was more pro-choice and the Democrats were more, if you will, pro-life. And but they set about saying, well, we can drive this issue and create a base that votes with us for the powerful over the people by using this cultural strategy. And they were very successful to the point where under George W. Bush, he handed over all of the selection of his nominees to the Federalist Society for the judges. And Trump continued doing that through his first term and into his second term. And so the Federalist Society is one of those factors that has helped pave the path to this moment now. But I'd say another factor is the dysfunction of the Senate. When you have a fast-changing world and a Senate that cannot actually get policy issues to the floor, hold a debate, and make a decision, you start to see that government is paralyzed. There increases the appetite for more strongman strategies. Well, at least somebody's going to make something happen now. So that's another factor feeding into this moment. We have, as you mentioned, Trump versus the United States. Law case, it was decided after Trump was out of office, but stemmed from his first time in office. And when I first heard that this was going to go to the Supreme Court, I literally laughed. No Supreme Court would ever find that the Constitution says the president cannot be held accountable for a crime as long as it's papered over as a government action. Because after all, the founders were terrified of a president becoming a king. So these originalists on the court, that they call themselves originalists, they go back and they're looking like, no, there's nothing in the Constitution. They could have written into the Constitution that a president making government decisions is not accountable for a crime in order to provide more security for difficult decisions that happen. They could have, but no, it's not there. So they found invisible ink. They did exactly the opposite of what I was so sure they do. I thought they would reject that outright, and instead they supported that premise. It is incredible to have a court that says, we're going to find something that's not in the Constitution and pretend it's there because we think it's good policy, that a president shouldn't be burdened by the concern that they're breaking the law. So now you have the evidence of what that can breed. All sorts of laws being broken all the time. And from the very first firing of the inspector generals, the law says you can't do that unless you have cause, unless you give 30 days notice. And Team Trump said, don't worry about that. Boom, they're fired. And you can appeal it in court, and maybe a year from now there'll be a decision, and we might have to reverse on some things when we lose. Hell, we're not concerned about breaking the law. And then, as you point out, the pardon power puts a whole executive branch in this place. So now here's Hegseth going, well, maybe what I did was murder. Maybe what I did was a war crime. But I've got pardon protection. This president has demonstrated he's willing to pardon those of us who are loyal to him. So as long as I don't piss off the president of the United States, I've got protection here to ignore the law. So those are all factors. They set the stage, though, for this remarkable moment. in which these multiple strategies were carefully crafted into Project 2025, where you have the architect of that strategy, Mr. Vogt, sitting in the place where all government decisions go to, or a tremendous number of them. And so he's able to help facilitate so much of the actual actions we're seeing, including stealing the power of the purse, a huge one, which OMB has massive control over. And when Mr. Vogt said in my office before he went to our confirmation hearing in budget, he was quite honest with me about what he planned. He's like, I think the president can just cancel any programs he wants. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. This has been adjudicated by the court twice. Let's turn the clock back to Nixon freezing funds and pounding funds, it was adjudicated after he left office. But the ruling was, no, sorry, President, you cannot impound funds. Or let's fast forward to 1996 when the Congress voted a line item veto and said, the president, we're giving you the power to cancel the programs you don't like. Well, the court said, no, hell no, you can't do that. The Constitution is very clear. It's the responsibility of Congress. That's really the difference between authoritarian, where decisions on how programs are designed and how they're funded and whether they're funded is done by the executive versus the Congress. And so Congress has that responsibility. And Mr. Vogt said, you know what? I'm a huge advocate of the unitary executive. I think there's massive power, and I think the court's going to find with us to give that massive power to the president. And that is exactly what happened when the court proceeded to say, hey, if a president doesn't like a program and he stalls the funding to the end of the year and then files a rescission within the last 45 days, he can kill the program through that. And it has this fancy name of pocket rescission. So this court, unlike previous courts, has said, power of the purse, the president can use some clever tactics to essentially create a line item veto. Again, not something I expected, but it's set in motion by events that started 3 decades ago.
Yeah, I think it's almost a charming notion that writing something in the Constitution would actually preclude people from violating that behavior these days. Because, of course, there's an emoluments clause. There are actually two in the Constitution. Those have been ignored altogether. There is a clause in the 14th Amendment that says that if you were born here, you become a citizen. They're trying to eliminate that. There's the 25th Amendment, which says you can't run for more than 2 terms, and they're talking about doing that. So, the court's willing to work its way around the Constitution, or ignore it altogether. And then on top of that, you have these issues of judgment, the unitary executive issues, where, for example, there's a case pending now about tariffs where the president says, no, it's an emergency, and I can declare an emergency, and I can essentially take away from the Congress the power to levy taxes, and I can arrogate it onto myself. All those things are happening. So it does say that the situation we're in is quite extreme. And as our time is running out here, and I could go on and on with this because I think you're so on target and thoughtful about it. But as our time is running out, I do have to ask one of the other hard questions. And again, it's one you've dealt with. And that is, not just what could the Congress do, but what can Democrats in the Congress do? What can the opposition do? And, a while back there was discussion, there's now a fight club, and there are a bunch of Democrats that have gotten together and said leadership has been not as strong as it should be given the nature of this threat. We've got to change our tactics. You were part of that, and I was wondering if you might talk about what you'd like to see in the way of opposition leadership given the gravity of the situation we face.
Well, one thing we can do is keep helping facilitate the understanding that we have this authoritarian takeover, and those other elements, weaponizing the judiciary to go after the enemies of the president or perceived enemies, putting the military in the streets, working to rig the next elections. Those are other facets that are well underway. And I think when people hear that kind of whole rhythm and go, oh my goodness, okay, I understand it's a coherent plan. Understanding that by citizens can help us in two ways. The first is that as you look at the authoritarian takeovers from within, experts often say there are two main ways that you can hopefully prevent the entrenchment of that authoritarian control. And one of those is citizen protests in the first year, because if there are no protests, citizens look around and go, well, this just must be normal. Maybe I haven't been paying attention. Maybe these violating these norms and these standards is acceptable. Oh, there wasn't due process, but well, maybe it was only not doing due process for people who are here without documentation, even though the Constitution says persons, not if you will, U.S. citizens, in terms of due process must be accorded to all, and so on and so forth. So you need, and that's why I'm so pleased to see the No Kings demonstration with 7 million people turning out. So that protest is incredibly important. And the more we can educate citizens and ring the alarm bells, hopefully that will help amplify citizen response. And the second is the next election, because that next election, if you do not succeed in seriously rebuffing the authoritarian tactics, by the next election thereafter, another 2 years down the line, it's very likely this system will have been rigged enough that you will have lost your opportunity to stop the entrenchment of authoritarian power. Now, you asked me about a different aspect also, about a group of senators referred to as the Fight Club. And the basic philosophy there is that we are coming into a world in which we have so much here in America. This is my version, by the way. This is not an official presentation. This is my version of why I'm involved, is that there's so much wealth inequality that wealth is being channeled into hedge funds and into elections to essentially create government buy-in for the powerful rather than buy-in for the people. And that if you want really to save the vision of government by the people, you have to take on that issue. And that means you have to fight for things that the powerful groups don't like. You have to fight for us to get the best price on drugs that are developed here in the United States, in the developed world, rather than the worst price. I mean, we pay so much more than any other country because of the power of the pharmaceutical lobby. You have to fight to keep the hedge funds from buying up all our housing and killing the dream of home ownership for the next generation, which is dying right before our eyes. You have to be willing to take on issues and help elect folks who are willing to actually fight for the welfare of the people of the United States, not simply to indulge the policy choices of the already overwhelmingly influential class. So that's the basic philosophy of that effort. But I think fighting authoritarianism fits right into it.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all much needed, and that your efforts are extremely important in all of this, and I hope we will be able to continue this conversation at some point in the future because every platform that you can get on, I think, helps advance the message, and it couldn't be more urgent. So thank you very much, Senator, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll continue to talk about these issues here week in and week out in all of the programming that we do. We hope you'll continue to join us. For now, bye-bye.
Thank you, David. And to everyone,